Are the strange sounds in the forest made by a human or a monster? Spooky tales await. Subscribe now. There were banging noises and also the sounds of someone walking through the hallways. Also, I could absolutely not take being in the bedroom. It was filled with mirrors. My wife would wake up every morning at around 3:00 a.m. and be unable to fall back to sleep the third night. I couldn't take it anymore. The dark feelings almost had me in tears and an anxiety attack. So we left the next evening, taking a loss on our last night booked at the cabin. I just hope that whatever it is that it didn't follow me home. I bought my house in 2013 and was aware that before we moved in, an elderly lady had lived there for around 4 years before passing away. We never learned if the woman passed away in the house, but I was not worried about it at the time. This is just for some context, as I'm not actually sure to this day that anyone actually died in the house anyway. In June of 2013, one night before we moved the furniture to the new house, my wife and our 2 toddlers were painting and it was getting pretty late. My wife decided that she would take the kids and head to my parents' house for the night. While I was painting alone in the master bedroom, I heard the toilet seat slammed down violently in the guest bathroom, on the other side of the wall where I was painting. I mustered my courage up and walked around the corner down the hallway, stepped into the bathroom, and turned the light on, only to find that the toilet seat was up. The second thing that happened was in December of 2013. I remember this because it was around Christmas time, and we had just finished loading up the car to head out to Florida from Texas. I had just gotten into the car that was parked in the garage facing the road. My wife was inside checking that everything in the house was set for our 2 trip. Shortly after I had sat down and started the car, my wife sat down next to me and shut the door, and almost immediately after my wife sat down, I swear that I saw a figure of a person walk behind the car in my rearview mirror. I looked at my wife and asked if she saw that, and with a cold look of fear on her face, she muttered yeah. I ended up searching the house for 15 minutes, because I was convinced that somebody must have been in there. But in the end I found nothing. The last occurrence that happened was actually in 2016. It was late and I was in the office playing Minecraft on my PC. I fell asleep while playing in my chair with my shirt off and woke up to the touch of a hand on my chest from behind me, while still sort of half asleep. I started to open my eyes and felt nails digging into my skin and sort of yelped. I jumped up and went into the living room, and flipped the light on and had 3 claw marks on the left side of my chest. Additionally, my wife had just been given 2 Japanese geisha dolls that were set on the mantel over our fireplace, and I got a really eerie feeling upon looking at them, as I walked into the living room and threw them away. So this may have been something else. I'm not too sure. The dolls were bought at an antique shop and were a gift, but still there was something off about them, and so in the end I got rid of them. This happened when I was 16. I was staying with my best friend at an old plantation house in Venice, Mississippi. It had a very old shack out back on the property. We had been on the Ouija board earlier, and afterwards I set a video camera on the staircase aiming at the Ouija board. After watching the recording, we noticed orbs coming out and back into the Ouija board. I didn't even know about orbs at the time, but I just thought that it was pretty cool. I didn't realize that we'd actually captured something very interesting really. I wish that I still had that tape too. Anyway. Later that night at around 3:00 a.m., my friend's nephew, who was about 3 at that time, came out of his room, walking in a sort of daze. We asked him what he was doing and he didn't answer. So we asked again, but said his name. He sort of looks at us and says, "Eyes are not Nicholas. My name is Samuel. I live out back in the slave house." This was not Nicholas' voice too. I mean, he had never heard anyone speak in that sort of slang before. He then turned around and went back to his room and went to sleep. I asked my friend if Nicholas had ever spoken like that, and he just slowly shook his head. We were both pretty freaked out, but not scared. Nothing ever felt really malevolent or anything. I'm 42 now and starting to realize that my life is on a downward spiral to death. It honestly scares me, and I just want to be with my family and friends again after this life. When I start to doubt myself about it just being nothingness. After I reminded myself about what I experienced that night, I always feel a little bit better. It hasn't been religion or anything like that makes me believe that there's something after this. Instead, it was that experience that night. I know what I experienced, and I know that someone entered back into our reality for just a couple of minutes then. So they had to be well somewhere else, and that is what gives me some comfort when I think about death. So back in 1995, I was 12. At the time I finally decided to play the Ouija board with my dad. I should preface that my dad used to do a lot of seances and other occult things like tarot. As a result, he had some pretty unsettling encounters that he told me about, which I might share another time. But for now we go through with this game and we ask the usual questions, and I distinctly remember how unusual the movements of the glass piece felt. It didn't feel like controlled natural movements in any case. Later that night we started watching TV, and I kept seeing these little green human-shaped figures pop up in the corner of my eye, and when I tried to look directly at them, as usual, nothing was there. This goes on for about 5 minutes and my dad starts laughing and says, "You see them too, huh?" I thought that he was trying to scare me, and so, instead of telling him what exactly I saw, I said, "See what?" He laughs again, and says, "Those little green guys." This comment was honestly one of the scariest things that I've ever experienced to this day and afterwards. I have never touched a Ouija board again. That last piece of this story involves going outside with him, so he could smoke, and our black inside outside cat hissed at us and the house and jumped off the van and ran off down the neighborhood and didn't come back until late the following afternoon. He also knew that something was seriously wrong. Obviously people say that WEA is fake, but depending on who is using it, their openness and location, I think it opens areas that shouldn't be opened. It's been almost 30 years and that moment still sticks with me, and I never ever considered that game ever again. So me and my sister were sitting in the garden at night after we came home from a walk, and I saw a small flash out of the corner of my eye. But I ignored it at first, because I wasn't sure if my mind was just playing tricks on me or not. But then she goes, "Hey, did you just see that flash?" I said yes, and we kept talking for a few more minutes, and while I was facing her, I saw another flash out of the corner of my eye. She saw that too, and then we saw a huge star appear. There were no other stars around that night. Then the star disappears and reappears multiple times. After a bunch of times of this, it disappears and then reappears a couple of inches in the sky away. It did this a few times until it had moved halfway across the entire sky. Maybe in about 5 seconds. We started freaking out and I take a phone and try to record it, but the videos weren't that good. I do have them, though, and so I have some proof of it. My sister runs inside the house and she comes outside with my mom and my other sister, and my mom isn't that impressed, because she can't see it moving. It just looks like a regular star at first. She eventually goes back inside and then immediately after we see the shooting light, come back. But this time there were many of them, but they seemed almost high-tech and they formed formations that didn't seem to make any sense. We call our mother back outside and this time she can definitely see them. We stand and watch them for at least 10 minutes now. My mother can clearly see them, so she starts praying, and my sister is freaking out. My other sister didn't come out again. She didn't believe us, because the first time she came out she didn't see anything. My mother and sister start freaking out and they went inside. I wanted to stay and watch though, but I was sort of scared to be alone outside. After seeing that, my sister starts texting her friends, but they don't believe her. So she asks me if we can go back outside so she can try and get a good picture of it. So we go outside and we spend like another 10 minutes recording, but all the videos were pretty bad because it was nighttime. This time we stand and watch in silence, though we even saw a few things that looked like small planes, maybe, which would disappear. After a few seconds, I watched a small light slowly glide across the sky and then it would disappear and reappear somewhere else, similar to the first UFOs that we saw, but this one was far more away. It was really weird to watch, because I think I was literally witnessing some sort of like teleportation. It's been 4 hours and I'm still trying to process all this. Also, when they disappeared, they'd sort of shrink and blink or shine, similarly to in cartoons when characters would throw something into space. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, then do comment below, because I'm not sure of the word for it, but that's what it was like. Then we see multiple lights move at the same speed, and they were making a large square formation, and I make a joke and said what if it's one big mother ship, and that makes my sister to freak out, and she runs inside. Now my family is really scared, and my sister even asked me to stay in her room until our dad came home from work and look. I don't even know if I've even explained the story properly. But this is the weirdest situation of my life and there's no way that it can be mistaken for anything naturally occurring. That much is clear. A couple of weeks ago too, now that I remembered this, my mom did call my name and shout, "What is that? Look out your window," but by the time that I got into the window, it was gone. I went to ask her what she saw, and she said that it was small and black and flying across the sky at super high speeds. I wasn't really sure what she was talking about, until obviously I saw it for myself today, but she saw it during the day. We saw it at night and she claims that the flying lights that we saw today look like what she saw, but she saw a black thing while we saw lights. This week has been absolutely hectic for me. My 3 kids, they have the flu. Oldest was first, then my younger 2 caught it after a visit to the clinic. I was heading to the CVS down the street from our house for their prescriptions. I decided last minute to drop my kids off at home with their dad so they could rest and I could go inside the store to pick up some medicine. I consider our neighborhood to be pretty safe. I've taken walks after dark and I've never felt afraid. Most of our neighbors are older folks who have lived there over a decade anyway, and when I pulled up to this EV's, I parked on the side parallel to our street. It's darker on that side, but the entrance is right around the corner and well lit. There was a man standing outside. He walked in front of my car and I could hear him talking, but my music was kind of loud. I figured that he was on a phone or something like that, but no real red flags. Yet my husband, he called me as the man walked back towards the corner adjacent to the entrance. I got out of my car, still on the phone, telling my husband, "Yeah, kiddos have the flu. I'm picking up medicine at the CVS etc." In a very pleasant voice though, the man then says to me, "Hey, I got a question, for you know where the main street is," by assuming that he's asking for directions, or the location of something. Tell him that I do. I'm still holding my phone to my ear. It's in a bright pink case, so I'm sure that he could see it. Now this man is standing directly in front of me. There is a pillar and a trash can behind him. Around the corner is a propane cage and a red box against the store's wall. Getting past him would put me in arm's reach. Next he asks for a ride there, though, to a homeless shelter. It's a very cold outside and he apparently doesn't want to freeze. I empathized with him, but said that I really couldn't. I offered to buy him gloves, and a blanket, and to ask if an employee in the store could assist finding him a ride, and man. This guy's face instantly changed to just pure rage, and then right back to pleasant. "Well, you know what happens to homeless people stuck outside. Right, you're going to help me. It's right down the street." I'm standing there at that point, unsure what to do. My husband is on the phone asking what's going on. I gently tell the man that I don't feel comfortable doing that and that I have the flu. I don't really, and my husband is on the phone with me. I don't care about the flu. Now he's getting more angry and not moving away from my route into the store. I didn't want to turn my back on him to go back to my car, which was several feet away in the dark. At this point, while this guy is glaring at me, I decided to quickly walk past him. I had my mask from my clinic in my jacket pocket, so I pulled that out and held it in front of me while I moved towards the trash can. He looked disgusted, but kept telling me that I need to give him a ride. It's right down the street. He insisted, but I know where that street is and it's not as close as he's making it out to be. He tried to guilt me and his words felt threatening, but he didn't really actually threaten me verbally, I guess. Once I was around the corner, I rushed into the store straight into the pharmacy. My husband then said that he's calling the police. He heard the way the man was talking to me and said to stay in the store. I'll admit that my knees were shaking. I'm not usually the type to be so afraid when confronted like this. When I got to the pharmacy, I interrupted the pharmacist and a customer apologizing then told them what happened. The pharmacist sent the store manager out. Tall glide with a long beard, looked like he doesn't take much from people. The police, they had already arrived. The man was told to leave, which he did momentarily, but soon he came back into the store yelling obscenities and something about me. Now, the store manager told this guy to get out, that he was trespassing on the property. The cop came back to talk to me and told me that she has arrested him many times. Apparently he's loud and likes to yell at people, but he allegedly isn't violent. The pharmacist had me hiding behind the screen, where they give vaccines, and left the half door to the pharmacy cracked open in case I needed to get out of there. The cop had also told me this guy's first and last name, as did the store manager. I'm wondering too, is that really normal? Anyway, the prescriptions are finally filled in and I leave the store. The police park next to my car to keep an eye on me. Oh, and the man refused a ride from the cop to the shelter. In the end, later on, I looked him up, though his name is unique, so he was easy to find online and surprise pre-eyes. He has a long record spanning 3 states and several counties, tons of public intoxication charges, DWI, urinating in public, but then there were the assault and battery charges and indecent exposure. I also looked up the homeless shelter and yeah, as I thought there isn't one way he wanted me to take him, but that area is definitely super sketchy. Earlier today I went to the corner store across from the CVS and told my friend, the overnight shift employee, what happened. She kicks him out of the store and calls the police every time that she sees him, because he yells and threatens customers, apparently, but he always takes off before the police arrive. Now I know that I could have handled that better. I was blindsided by his instant shift from pleasant to filled with rage. I guess a big thank you to the pharmacy team, though, who kept me safe, and the store manager for confronting the creep as well. I mean, they really didn't have to do all that, but they did. I'm thankful too that my husband recognized that I was in an unsafe situation over the phone, because if the police hadn't arrived, I really don't know what would have happened. This man is still out there somewhere in my area, and I really hope that I do not run into him somewhere out there. I, a 16-year-old female, have recently changed schools and everything seemed to be fine. I've even made a few new friends and met with a few past friends that I already knew everything was going pretty great really, until, of course, something had to go wrong for some context. I have a good friend there. But we're not that close to be like sharing things that are personal and all that. We just discuss things about school studies and things we both like. And here's where the story begins in 2023 September. At the start of the school year, I had found a little spot for myself to sit at. It was outside and quiet, which I like because I'm extremely introverted. I've been at that place multiple times, usually sitting with my notebook, writing stuff and drawing. After a good long while of hanging out at this place, I started to notice that there was this student always standing quite far away, sitting on his phone. At first, I didn't think too much of it, since he's not the only one who's hanging out at that spot, and there were other people sitting or walking around anyway. However, I've been getting this awful gut feeling that I'm being stared at in the middle of drawing or writing. Of course again, I still didn't think much of it, since I kept thinking it was just me being paranoid. Plus, I mean if it's a guy who just maybe wants to talk to me or something. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, I started sitting inside just to test that theory out, and where I was sitting there was a window ground level from where you could see the whole place from below. But because it was ground level, no one would be interested to look at the windows. First 2 days everything was fine, but on the third day he stopped coming to that place, which definitely perked up my interest and kind of made my stomach feel a bit upset. Well, I went back to sit in my usual place and he came back there. I had to pretend like I didn't notice him. It'd be safer if I just didn't acknowledge him, and in the end I just stopped coming to that place entirely. And yes, while there's not much to that story, there's more so on a little break day that our teachers decided to give us. We hung outside all day, and you were allowed to stay inside if you perhaps had the need for medical attention, or something of that sort. I went to a very isolated place, different from the one that I've been coming to before. It was basically a parking lot near the school. I sat and as usual I was drawing and writing. In fact, I was so focused on my notebook that I just didn't even notice my surroundings, and to my shock, I heard a familiar voice not far away, literally over the car where I was sitting on the staircase. I heard that same voice of this creepy guy. I felt as if my inspiration ran dry. At that point, my heart sort of fell to my stomach and I began to feel a bit nauseous. He was on a phone call or something, but before he was inside the school, going to the bathroom. And mind you, the parking lot is quite far away and no one can really see where you're sitting, unless they get closer where. I've never seen him on a phone call, or never saw him using his phone there. Usually he was sitting at my favorite spot, which now I despise, but I told the teachers that I felt a bit sick, which was true, and they let me inside till we had to leave from the school. I wanted to talk to my new friend about it, who knows him and frequently talks to him. Apparently, but I feel like I'll say something inappropriate, and he might actually distance himself from me. He's a great friend and I would hate to lose him. But I also want to do something to stop this matter from escalating, because I don't know, I just feel like I'm being stalked. I mean, maybe I'm going crazy, but the other day when I was walking home, I could have sworn that there were eyes on me. If I go and talk to the stalker himself, I feel like he'll sort of feel like he's finally been noticed or whatever, and maybe have a sense of victory that could encourage him to keep stalking me. I really don't know what to do other than to try to keep ignoring him, and I really don't want to give him any attention or notice him in the slightest. But the fear that he's going to do something even more creepy is making me feel scared when I attend school. I mean, I don't want this guy to follow me home or something. I have a sneaking suspicion too that he's now following me outside of school, because I could have swore that I saw him the other day again. Maybe my mind is just playing tricks on me, but what do you guys think? Is there something more to this, and if so, what should I do? I've had a few paranormal experiences throughout my life, but this one popped up into my brain the other day, and I've been thinking about it a lot and can't really explain what happened, so I thought that I would share. About 2 years ago, in the dead of winter, my power went out. This was a big problem for me because I have a pet leopard gecko, who requires heating elements to survive. It started getting very cold in my apartment very quickly, to the point where I became worried about my pet's safety, and did the only thing that I could think to do, which was take my gecko to my car and crank heater up. Normally we get a few power outages every winter in my area, and they last maybe an hour or two. This time was different because the power did not come back on for 6 hours. After about an hour of sitting in my driveway, I got extremely bored and started driving around my neighborhood, which had some more rural areas that butte up against national forest. One of these areas is an absolutely beautiful overlook, where you can see miles of the forest and also a few street lights. So I'd be able to see if the power came back on. So I drove there and parked to enjoy the view. I'd had the heat running for a while at this point and the car had gotten a bit hot, So I rolled down the window to let in some cool air, and almost immediately started hearing something kind of far off at first, kind of a weird sort of sad-sounding howl, I guess mixed with a sort of squawk. I assumed that this was an animal, but rolled up the window almost all of the way, just in case. Over the next 20 minutes. The sound got progressively closer, and closer to the car, until it sounded like it was circling me. I can still hear this sound in my mind clear as day, even though this happened several years ago, and I know what animals we had locally, and what they sounded like, and this, whatever it was, didn't sound like any of them. I got nervous and decided to leave and I go and get some food and gas in my neighboring town that still had power. About another hour passes and there's still no power. Having convinced myself that the sound was just an animal, and it had probably long since moved on, I went back to the overlook to enjoy my meal. About another hour goes by without anything happening, no noise, no nothing, until eventually I see movement among the big rocks in front of me. It's starting to get dark, so I can't really make it out perfectly, but at one point it looked like the head of a disfigured animal peered out at me over a rock and then disappeared. I see this several more times, but if it was an animal, there was something severely wrong with it, be it an injury, or a birth defect that would probably affect its quality of life, and I wanted to be able to let animal control know so they could find it, help it, or at least put it out of its misery if necessary, since it was clearly staying in that exact area. After a while it starts making that noise again, the same one as before, but now it's also added this horrible gurgling, and it almost sounds human. At this point it's gotten completely dark and I can't see much of anything, but I can still hear it circling the car. Eventually I hear what sounds like something messing around near the back tire, and I panic and peel out of the parking lot, and it was then that I looked behind me and see what is now very clearly a person in the tail lights. They attempted to chase the car for a few feet, but they quick gave up. Now is it possible that this was just a person under the influence or suffering from a mental health issue? Yeah, it definitely is, but that just seems pretty unlikely, since it was probably below 30 outside and far enough out of everyone's way that I doubt anyone would be hanging out there, let alone hanging out there for hours and wearing what appeared to be an animal skin on their head, if it wasn't a person. Based on the location and how the thing looked, well, I can only guess that it was probably a skinwalker. This experience honestly still terrifies me to this day. When I think about it, I believe that I may even have a recording of the sound that I'll try to find. If I can find it, I'll be sure to share it, but due to the power outage and wanting to save battery and all that, I didn't film or record most of the EXP experience just to conserve my already dying phone. I live with my partner and roommate, both of which are really into paranormal YouTube channels and shows. This is something that they bond over, and my roommate even has some tools that he has used. Even in our own house. That is over a century old. I, on the other hand, haven't an appreciation for it, but I'm not as into it as they are. I'm also more skeptical than they are, I suppose. Not to say that I don't believe in it, because I absolutely do, but I try to look at things from an objective point of view. With that being said, a few months ago, I am pretty sure I encountered a ghost cat. My partner and I have 3 cats. I work from home and have been dubbed to the crazy cat lady, so the cats and are all very attuned to one another. It began with me thinking that I see one of our cats out of the corner of my eye, but when I look, there's nothing there. I then began to see the cat figure walk around out of the corner of my eye. This is when I was introduced to the second ghost cat. One of them looks to be black or dark, while the other looks white. I've never seen both cats at the same time, but we have a white cat with grey markings, a brown tabby and a black and white tuxedo. Sometimes the ghost cats would do things my cats would normally do, so I chalked it up to being a muscle memory thing, kind of like I'm used to them being there, so I feel like they are there. Until a few weeks ago, when I was laying in bed, when I thought that I saw our white, with grey spots, cat dart across our room, something that she would absolutely do. But when I set up to talk to her, I didn't see her anywhere. I laid back down to see a white cat dart across the room the other way up into the bedroom window, and I heard scratching or tapping at the window, something that my cat would not do. I slowly sat up thinking that it had to be my cat only to see nothing. I tried telling myself that it's the muscle memory thing, but I couldn't get myself to believe at that time. I feel like it was a white ghost cat. Because of the amount of minor encounters, I decided to bring it up to my partner and roommate. My partner says that he thinks he's seen them too, but he's been too afraid to believe it, because he feels like it's not a cat, but a bad entity trying to disguise itself as something innocent. My roommate said I'm just used to the cats and I'm just overthinking it. This was super disheartening, because I don't feel like I'm being overdramatic at all. I really believe that I've felt them and seen them. Now I'm sharing this because I had a second encounter of one of them just a little bit ago. I think a black cat ghost touching me. I will sit at my desk to work and oftentimes my cats will come and rub up on my legs. Then I'll reach down to pet them. A few weeks ago, when this happened, I reached down to but there was no cat. I thought that it was the chair or my pant leg just tricking me, but it just happened again, and this time it felt sort of odd. Now I am fully convinced that there is a black ghost cat and a white ghost cat that live in my house. My cats have never acted strangely towards them, which is another reason that I don't believe that they're bad entities disguised. I also think that it could be one ghost cat, but I absolutely have seen both a black and white one, but never together, which I don't know. Maybe it is just one thing. Anyway, do you have any thoughts on this? Do you think that it is some sort of entity, ghost cats even a thing? Am I being dramatic? Is any of this valid? What do you think? Work night shift, so staying up through the night is pretty normal. On my days off about 2ish in the morning, I always let my dogs out, and I let one run and keep the other on a leash, because she loves to run after literally nothing, but my leash dog starts to snarl at the tree line. That is about 30 yards out from me, and I noticed something very large moving awkwardly into the tree line, moving into the woods. It was walking with a heavy rock side data moving very slowly. I own horses which are fenced in, and this was happening outside of their fenced-in area, so I know that it wasn't any of them. This thing, though, was looking as bigger than my horses, so I was really confused. We do have deer that like to nest or settle overnight inside the fence with their younglings, but because the horses ward off some predators like coyotes and such. I walked to my house to grab the flashlight and of course I shined the light, but there was nothing. I never heard a single crack or snap or nothing while I saw it, and afterwards it was gone, which was weird because it was so huge, and I would have expected to hear something anyway. My son said this afternoon that he saw something at 12:30 last night, and said one of the horses was out. But then after checking, all the horses were and said that he must have seen the biggest deer that he's ever seen, like a deer as big as a horse, or even bigger. Now he lives in a different house, but further away on the property, about 3 times the distance I am. I scare deer away every night before I let the dogs out, so I don't have to chase them in the middle of the night through the woods. But this whatever it was no deer. My wife believes it to be the spirit of one of our horses, or whatever that we had to put down last week. In the past we both have had our share of weird instances at that wood line, but this for me it definitely took the cake. Scary thing is that we are planning to build our future home right by that area in 2016. I was a junior in high school. I didn't live far from school, but it was still about an hour's walk. I was in a pretty good shape back then. I guess you could say, and didn't mind the walk, when my older sibling couldn't pick me up due to work. My parents were both at work too, and I hated asking friends for rides because it just felt sort of bummy anyway. I started to walk home on a nice September day in Florida. About 5 minutes down the road, I got the feel like someone was looking at me, and I turned around, and standing there about 50 feet away was a clown. This was back when the killer clown sightings were at an all-time high. It was late September, So I just assumed it was an early Halloween prank and shrugged it off. I turned back around and kept going. Another 5 minutes went by and I couldn't shake the feeling. A clown was following me again. I turned around and he was about 30 to 40 feet away. Now, I was needless to say pretty nervous at this point. I turned back around when I heard a snap and next to me, just inside the brush between subdivisions, was another clown. It was clear that this wasn't a prank anymore. Sensing that I was in danger, I started sprinting when the first one from behind me ran too, saying grab him. The second clown chased after me too. I could clearly hear their footsteps behind me. I scanned the nearby houses and thankfully saw a police cruiser in a driveway. I got there and banged in the door until someone answered. The cop, seeing me shaken up, looked around and saw one of the two holding a decently sized hunting knife, and told them to freeze. They both bolted, and after that I had just ran, and I never heard anything about the capture or anything. To this day, clowns still unsettle me, and I cannot see a picture of any of them, whether it be a party clown or Pennywise or whatever. Without thinking back to the time that I possibly almost died, I have had people stalk and follow me before, and because of that and my true crime addiction, I've become supremely paranoid and a solid curtain twitcher. I, a 31-year-old female, resided in upstairs room that was my first room to myself. As a child, I had to leave a bad situation and therefore ended up back at my childhood home for reference. When our house was built, we were told that the field to our left with horses in a barn at the time would one day soon be a development. It was 2000 when we were told that, and it wasn't until 2022 that roads started being formed and foundations laid. I'd already had someone follow me home before when I was young, but I was in a different bedroom next door. My parents put in a free library that's right below my window and nighttime security lights that were very bright and turn on. If you're within like 20 feet of the side of my house, my room is on. I'll admit, too, that having an open field next to me so long made me accustomed to not closing the curtains when I changed, because there was never anyone to really watch or anything. But obviously now there is. For the past 2 weeks, the burglar lights next to the free library have been going off late at night as well, because my one side of the curtain is open so I can use my vape. That was the only reason that I noticed it all. I didn't think too much of it at first. I mean, we lock all the doors and the windows every night, and I'm on the second floor anyway. I also always looked out to see if it was a car, someone walking their dog or maybe a deer, only to see nothing to add to that as well. They put in a ton of street lights around this area, so visibility is pretty great, but it just kept happening for whatever reason. So last night I did my usual and I saw the lights come on out of my peripherals, giving full view out the window. I was going to bed. It was around 3:00 in the morning, turning the TV off, closing the window and curtains, turning the light out. Then I ducked down, peering through the curtains to the sidewalk below, and I honestly thought that I was going to pass out when, after a few minutes, maybe 5, someone comes out from the side of my house, all silhouette dressed completely in black. They kept their back to me until the light turned off, but I swear that I could still see them standing there looking up like they could see me. I called the police, but while I was on the phone with the operator, I saw him run off. There really wasn't much that they could do except say that they'd have a car. Drive around and look. My parents are asleep and I know that I have to tell them tomorrow, but this honestly scares me a lot. If it hadn't have been happening for weeks and was a solo incident, I would probably be fine about it, but the fact that the light has been going off without me seeing activity, and what happened tonight makes me think that this person has been watching me and probably casing my house. Eventually I did tell my parents and at first they brushed me off, claiming that I'd had a couple of drinks and it was late, so I probably just saw someone checking out the library. I then had another conversation about it with just my dad, who said that there had been reports the last couple of weeks of car break-ins, and since my car has parked on my side of the street right have outside of my window, maybe they were trying to break into it. I pointed out that if he was trying to get into my car, why was he pressed up against the house, where he wasn't visible from my window, and why did he at no point go towards my car as well? I think that I freaked him out enough that we are going to potentially get a camera for that area. Given all of the development happening around us, I think it's smart, even without this incident. Anyway, he is hoping that this guy doesn't have plans to break into our home at some point. But if he does, then what do you guys think that I should do for context? I live in the woods of southern West Virginia, deep in the Appalachian wilderness. I'm an hour and a half away from any large city, and another 30 minutes from the nearest Walmart. Needless to say, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Yesterday I came home to a strange feeling that I was being watched. I thought that it might have been coyotes, so being the homesteader that I am, I sat outside with my gun and LGB livestock guardian dog and waited for them to come for my chickens. My dog was alerting me to the presence of something, but when he would get close to where it was, it just seemed to disappear. He would stick his nose in the air and catch wind of where it was and run to it. Never finding anything. Fast forward to tonight, and I have the same feeling. I take my light outside and shine it at the edge of the woods, and that was when I noticed eyes staring at me. This is odd too, considering that my 150B LGB is going nuts barking and looking for this thing, and it's sitting still not moving. I walk right up to it and I see a bobcat looking me dead in the eyes from 10 feet away. It looked away from me and walked around a tree, completely not paying attention to me now. For those who live in the city, bobcats are extremely rare to see, let alone come within 10 feet of shining a light directly on it. I pulled my pistol out to shoot it, and it didn't go off. I racked it back and tried again, and still nothing. It felt like something was holding my trigger back. Almost I ran inside to get my shotgun at this point, and I followed it into the woods about a quarter mile before I finally lost it. Keep in mind it never once ran from me, but instead walked slowly as if it was trying to lead me somewhere. When I came back out with the shotgun and followed it into the woods, as soon as I crossed the wood line, fog rolled in, as if someone had a fog machine and was aiming it right at me. I mean, I couldn't see 5T in front of me about the time that I turn around to come home. I see through the trees faintly, my fiancé standing on the porch looking back and forth from me and a spot far away behind my house in the woods. I came back down and she was freaking out. She said that she heard me screaming, like screaming murder, for her to help me. She said that I was screaming her name and helped me from well over another quarter mile from where I actually was. She came outside to help me when she saw my light in the opposite direction of where she was still hearing the screaming coming from during this whole thing. I never heard screaming once, though, and I obviously never screamed myself. However, I had the constant feeling of being followed and watched that entire time, but I could never find out what was doing it. The night is young, though, and quite honestly, I'm sort of expecting things to get a bit weirder tonight. If anything happens, then I'll be sure to post an update, but to wish me luck. I've been staging residential property homes in the San Francisco Bay Area for about 3 years now. I visit just about every neighborhood and every price range, from like 700 studios insane I know to 8 million homes. I usually never know the history of the property or the current sellers, but sometimes I do get insight from real estate agents that the family is growing and needs more room. The daughter is selling her pasted parents' home, a divorce, etc. I have only on a few occasions felt some not so welcoming energy in homes. I guess you could say maybe I walk a little quicker out of a room, or maybe I think that I saw someone walk past me through a doorway when there was nobody there, but nothing really threatening or anything. That is until today. So I'm sitting in this really nice, empty home overlooking the ocean in San Francisco, just leaning against a wall in a room off the living room. The movers are outside loading the furniture into the garage to prep for our stage in 3 days. As I sit there in this quiet, empty home, up against a wall with a bathroom on my right and a closet to my left, just looking at my phone, I hear the most guttural deep and high-pitched growl or scream come directly from behind me. Now I'm up against a wall, so there's nothing but the bathroom in the closet behind me. I paused and sat there for a minute and then got up to look out the windows, thinking that it must be a dog outside or something, but there was nothing. I immediately felt very uneasy and suddenly frightened. I leave the house and wait with the movers closed up and I just left. I have never heard anything like this or felt so unwelcome in an empty home. I'm 17 now, but this happened from when I was roughly 5 to 8. Because this happened so long ago. I'm sure that there are a lot of things that I've forgotten over time or unintentionally blocked out, but around the time that I started kindergarten, we'd moved to a complex where I got a room of my own for the first time. I remember being scared to have a room all to myself, so I would always make sure my closet door was firmly closed, because I was pretty scared of monsters in my closet. I think this might have stemmed from my mom watching a lot of horror content around me, or maybe just a general childish fear. I guess I do remember it being shortly after we had moved in though that I woke up when it was dark out, and I could tell by my window that was to the right of my bed. My closet door opened and this boy hovered very low to the ground round, still maybe an inch off, given that he seemed about my height or size, but didn't make a sound as he walked out of the closet and walked in a straight path from my closet to the window, but he stopped midway at the foot of my bed and just seemed to stare at me. His face was like melted glass, similar to the longer face ghost kid from Caroline. Sorry if you don't know that, but that's the only example that I can think of, but he wore a sailor suit very similar to the results that you get for searching 1950s boy sailor suit. I remember wanting to scream, but for some reason I couldn't. I hid under my blankets for a long time and I don't remember what happened after that, but I assumed that eventually I must have fallen asleep now. It might have been a few days or maybe even a week, but I saw him again shortly after this. It was roughly the exact same encounter, so it doesn't stand out in my brain, but over the course of a few months I had the courage to look back at him. I was very scared, but he would never do anything, and I think that I knew that. I mean, he never attempted to climb on my bed or anything or get closer to me. He only ever stopped and just sort of stared at me, and that never seemed to change. After I started looking at him, I learned that after he left the foot of my bed, he would go to the wall on my left and form a hole in my wall that he would then go through. I remember there were a few times that I would get up in the morning and try to see the portal, or whatever it was, but of course it was never. There was a long time of build-up too, but eventually I just wasn't scared anymore, and I remember the feeling of not being afraid. When I looked back at him, after I wasn't scared anymore, I was able to get out of my bed right after he would leave and try to go through the portal, but it would close before I could get to the wall. I remember one specific night, though, where he just didn't show up, and I got confused, because by that time it had become a routine to see him every night. I got up and looked out my window to see him feeding the deer on the property. Deer are pretty common in this area. He didn't look up at me or anything, but I remember just sort of staring at him after we moved away from the complex. I never experienced anything close to this or ever had him appear in a dream or anything other. Small details I want to add as well is that he only seemed to exist in the complex. He never appeared in my school or daycare or anywhere else. My mom told me a few years ago that neighbors in the complex would tell her that I would play games by myself, but seemingly pretend that I was playing with another person. But I myself have no memory of that, so I don't know how reliable that actually is. From what I remember, no other kid in the complex experienced anything similar to this, including my two sisters, who shared a room across from mine. I would tell people about the boy that I would see, but they all reacted a bit weird. It's also taken me a long time to come to the conclusion that this was probably paranormal, so I guess I just wanted to share it, and I want to know if anyone has had any similar memories that they carry with them. Like I said, my memories probably changed a bit over time, so take everything that I said with a bit of a grain of salt, but what I do remember very clearly is that there was this boy and he would come into my room every night. So to give you a little bit of background information on this story, I would like to start with the fact that I'm European. I've shared another story a couple of months back about something that happened to me in Tuscany, Italy, as for me and my friends in this story. Well, we are from Spain, and when this happened end of September 2023, we were fairly new to the US. I moved here a while back for law school, and so did my friends. We'd been living here for a few months and decided to explore the nature of this beautiful continent. As we all live in New York City so long, story short, we decided to go on a road trip to Canada, drive around Lake Ontario, and then drive back to New York City through upstate New York. I'm a male and my friends were 3 females. Their names are Lisa, Anna and Charlotte, and everything went super smooth until the last night. So for our last night, we had rented an off-grid cabin in a remote area, in the woods in upstate New York. To give some locals an idea, we were like half an hour drive from Harrisburg. I think me and Lisa had decided to spend one night in this cabin, because it was one with nature. The cabin was super old, made from logwood, and there was no running water or electricity here. Both me and Lisa had experience with survival in the wild in Europe. I for myself had been a Boy Scout my whole life, and even was a scout leader for a while. Our other 2 friends were, as much as I love them, pure red city girls. They had pretty much zero experience with camping, or to just be in place where there's no service for the phone or whatever, as was the case in this cabin. We had been driving all day to get there, and when we reached the beginning of the forest, it was already past 10 p.m., and was really dark that night. While driving to this place, we lost internet connection with the GPS, and so I had to drive to the cabin on intuition, paired with a good old-fashioned map, hoping for the best while trying to drive safe on these muddy trails. It was also rainy the whole day as well. On the way there, Anna and Charlotte were in the back of the car, and the moment that they lost phone service, they got pretty uneasy for the rest of the ride. All of a sudden, though, in the pitch-black darkness of the forest, we all saw a campfire, but there were no houses around or people, just a campfire, a well-organized one, since the fire was not spreading and it was not as big as a bonfire or anything. It kind of startled all of us, as this was a little bit weird, since there was no one around, and we were really deep in the forest already, plus it was getting pretty late at this point. But when this happened, we also reached the end of the trail and we figured that we'd taken the wrong trail at a crossroads before or something. So I turned around and we were on our way again half an hour later, and a couple of wrong trails later as well. We finally had arrived at our destination, as we could finally see the first glimpse of this god-forsaken cabin in the middle of nowhere. To give you a bit of an idea of just how old it was as well. The potty was made out of wood and was outside of the cabin. When we arrived, it was still raining, and both Anna and Lisa were definitely not in the mood for getting out of the car, and getting in the cabin with 0 lights was freaking them out too. So me and Lisa left the lights of the car on and went inside the cabin, while also using our phone flashlights to check the cabin out and see if we could find any old flashlights, which we did in the end, and to see if we could turn on the fireplace, which we didn't, because all the wood was still wet from the rain and it seemed as if nobody had prepared dry wood anywhere as well. So with a couple of old flashlights and a small improvised fire I managed to make in the stove, and we all 4 got into the cabin, and I started to make some pasta for us. Meanwhile the girls were preparing the beds and closing the windows, since it was already cold. In this part of the state, the cabin had a small ladder, which led to an elevated room or space, with a bed where all 3 of the girls could fit in, and I would sleep downstairs in a bunk bed that seemed older than the First World War. While making pasta, Anna, one of the city girls, came up to me, and knowing that both Lisa and Charlotte did not like to hear anything scary at night, told me that she had seen an old cemetery in the middle of the forest on the way to our cabin, and that she had seen a figure walking around there. I first laughed it off as nothing. As I mentioned in my previous story, I do not consider myself a big believer of scary stuff. Being from Spain, we take promises very seriously. To swear on God is very serious for us, and she swore that she was not lying. I told her that I believed her, but that there was really no need to panic, as I would lock all the doors when we would go to sleep at night. We had some pasture and managed to make a couple of s'mores, which are lovely by the way, and drank a couple of beers, or at least I did. They all just had one. I can assure you that I'm not a drunk after a couple of beers, and that I would never start to hallucinate, or anything too. I'm just saying this in case anyone thinks that I saw stuff because of the beer or whatever, but they all three went to sleep pretty early after finishing the s'mores and their beer, and I, considering that I really love the outdoors and that I don't really mind a little bit of rain, decided to take my last beer and a flashlight outside to the front porch, also very old and made of wood, and sat myself down with my beer while enjoying the sound of the rain and the lovely side of not seeing a single light in the distance. For more scares, subscribe.